Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida, and this week marked 2 years since the Surfside building collapse that killed 98 people and left hundreds of others suffering in its aftermath. Federal investigators this week released their preliminary findings, focusing mainly on the structural weaknesses of the pool deck, which appears to have set off a chain reaction of failing pillars when it crashed into the underground garage, essentially pulling the rest of the building down with it. Now, the final report is not expected until sometime in 2025, but I think we have our answers right now. As I have noted before, every family deals with the grief and trauma from this tragedy in different ways. This week, I spoke to Martin Langesfeld, whose sister Nicole and her husband Louis were killed in the collapse.
It's so hard to believe that we're in the 2-year mark already. So much has happened in the past 2 years. And at the same time, we can all remember it as if it was this morning that we received the notification that a building had collapsed, and seeing the disaster, the debris, the fire, the rubble, the fire rescue, the families crying, the screaming, the media swarming outside. It's hard to believe that it was a reality. And going to Surfside and seeing that big empty hole hurts. It never gets easier. And just the thought that another building was proposed a week ago before the 2-year mark, when we don't even know why this one collapsed in the first place, speaks a lot about why the building collapsed.
And I want to talk, we'll talk about the plans for the site, but I want to stay with what you've experienced over the past 2 years, your family, your father, your mother, the other families. You said it doesn't really get easier. There's that idea that sometimes time heals these things. Is it still too early for that to be taking place for you?
Everyone is going through this process and grieving in their own way. I'll speak for myself. It doesn't get easier with time. Actually, it gets harder, because with time is when you realize you have no option but to accept the reality and that we're not in control of this life, really. And 2 years later, all we can do is look back at our families and think, what a beautiful smile, and the memories, and just how we lived for such a short time together. My sister was 26 years old. Nikki, her husband Louis, 28 years old, and them having just recently gotten married a few months prior to the collapse, and not even be able to have their dream wedding. There are so many stories that died in 12 seconds that we'll never see another chapter, another day of light. And as you said, it's very hard. It's very hard to be there for my parents, to be there for my family, just as other families are all struggling to go day by day. But it doesn't get easier when so much politics is involved. We've had to beg Miami-Dade County to not throw away human remains. You know, it's not public information, but we had to sign a release that we were getting a portion of my sister Nikki and her husband Louis from the medical examiner's office. And although we had to sign this release, we had to beg Miami-Dade County to keep searching in the rubble to find more human remains and personal property 3 times. And by the 4th time, every time they searched, they found new human remains. We would get calls from the medical examiner's office. And they didn't want to keep searching. They didn't want the media to keep knocking their door saying, what's up with the rubble? Where are the human remains? So Miami-Dade County Mayor Daniel Levin-Cava threw it away. They gave the green light to just throw away in the trash families' human remains. Things like this just imagine just receiving a phone call at 3 p.m., 4 p.m. saying, we identified your daughter's finger. It's just a never-ending nightmare. And then a week later saying, oh, we're going to throw away the rest of her body as if it's trash less than 2 years away. And the rubble, we don't know if there's any answers as to why the building of the cause of the collapse is in that rubble. We don't know.
Well, Bart, I understand the anger, the frustration, and I imagine I would take the same position you're taking now as a family member, but at some point, I know they've been through that rubble that they transported from the site to a secondary site to go through, with the federal investigators taking the pieces that they wanted. I mean, you could spend years continuing to go through that to that rubble, and maybe you find, you're talking about bone fragments and things like that. How long should that continue for?
And I completely see the other side of this, where sometimes you have to let go. But if you compare it to 9/11, we've worked with those victims. They searched for years and years to find not only bone fragments and human remains, which are priceless to us and it has no value, but also the human property that just went missing. A lot of it just disappeared. When you find wine bottles that are intact and wedding rings with diamonds or very expensive watches, that everything, all these expensive things just disappeared.
Well, when was the last time you got a call, or your family got a call, about either Nikki or her husband finding something of theirs?
A few months ago. Every time they searched the rubble, they found new things. So I don't understand what the rush is before the 2-year mark to throw everything away without giving the families a warning first of all, without giving us the option to bury all the rubble with respect instead of trashing it. There are other ways to work around this. And what's the rush? It was 2 years. If every time you search, you find new things, keep searching until you don't find anything else. And in that point, we sit down, have a normal conversation and say, okay, you know what? You did what you could. Let's bury it.
Martin, I know that one of the ways that you've tried to deal with the pain, the anger, is by investing so much in trying to make a difference. Whether it was passing legislation in Tallahassee, talking about what should happen to the land going forward. How important is it? How important has that been for you? That the idea of trying to, I don't want to say make sense of or make something good out of, because that's not what is happening here, but to try to take some steps for yourself to try to make a difference going forward. Does that help, or does that just sort of prolong the pain for you as well?
No, to me, I find it does help me. And the main reason I do it is because it's impossible to understand the pain and agony that not knowing whether your family is alive or not for 3 weeks, being buried under the rubble, and all the dirty part of everything after that. It's nothing I ever wish anyone to go through. And the reason I got so involved is because after this, and I saw the political part of it, I saw why the building collapsed. This building was up for 40 years and it had violations from day one. It just comes to show how many other buildings are in the same situation across the nation. A building collapsed 2 weeks ago in Iowa.
Your objection to the building is more fundamental, is it not? Is it not about trying to create a sanctuary, a refuge, a memorial of some sort for those that died there?
We've been trying. I've been advocating for a memorial with other families before my sister was even recovered to us. Before my sister was recovered to us, the land went up for sale while there were still bodies in there, in the rubble. And we're not trying to stop a development from going up. We're trying to work with the developer to allocate a portion of the collapse site for a memorial, just like it happened in 9/11, just like it happened in Oklahoma, and like it's about to happen in the Las Vegas portion in the shooting. We're just trying to work with the developer for some respect as to the reason. There are 98 reasons why to work with us.
And are they refusing? I mean, because it seems, so I just want to be clear, you're not saying that there cannot be any development on that land. You just want to make sure that there is something, whether it's a garden, whether it's, It's something that would take place in that area, a small park, a remembrance zone, something that you want to see take up part of that land.
Just a portion. We're not trying to stop this development whatsoever. That's already private property. I wish this land never went up for sale, but that's out of our control. We're just trying to ask for a portion of the site, and they can do whatever they want for their profit shareholders. Just work with a portion, and that's it. But other than that, NIST cannot give a concrete answer onto whether or not.
Well, let me ask you, what is the developer's response when you try to reach out to them? Are they communicating at all with the families?
Families have never had direct contact with him. The only person that has had direct contact with the developer is Mayor Shlomo Danzinger of Surfside, who flew to Dubai without telling anyone. Miami-Dade did an investigation that he had a secret meeting in Dubai. There's no record. We don't know what happened behind those doors. All we know is that when Mayor Danzinger came back, all the banners were taken off. There were banners with the 98 names, and there were flowers. If you go by the site now, there are no banners, there's nothing. And there's no conversation of a memorial on the site. All we got was proposals for a new development that looked nothing like the other buildings in Surfside. What happened in Dubai? We're just asking, as regular victims' families, to have a meeting and a regular conversation to see how we can respect our loved ones. Not to be left out with meetings no one knew about when we've asked countless times to be part of all these meetings. We need transparency here. We need transparency and respect. We're not getting that.
When we come back, we will talk to the mayor of Surfside, Shlomo Danzinger, and try to get some of those answers. Stay with us. Welcome back. Earlier I spoke to Martin Langesfeld, who believes city officials in Surfside have not been responsive to the family's needs and concerns. Now, it is important to note that not all families feel this way. Martin is perhaps the most outspoken and critical, but as I've said before, everyone processes their grief and trauma in different ways. But he did raise a point that other families echoed to me, mainly that Surfside Mayor Shlomo Danzinger has not been as transparent as they would like, especially when it comes to his dealings with the Dubai businessman who has purchased the land for $120 million and plans to build luxury condos on the site. I spoke to Mayor Danzinger last week ahead of the 2-year anniversary mark.
You know, we do speak with the family members who lost their loved ones. You know, there's no getting back from that. Just got off the phone right now with, another survivor who lost their apartment, lost all their belongings, is struggling to get back into it, has children that, still don't sleep at night because they're petrified. So even 2 years later, there's a lot of people that are still hurting from this, that are suffering, and, will continue to for a very long time.
What are the latest plans as regards the city for the site itself? I know obviously there's a developer, but talk to me about what it is that you think will happen at the site in terms of whether or not there'll be some sort of memorial there in addition to the development. Where does it stand right now?
So the site itself was sold, quite a little while ago. That became private property and is owned by the company Damak out of Dubai. But the city has always dedicated 88th Street. The commission prior made a resolution dedicating 88th Street, which is the street right in front of the building entrance, as it was, towards the memorial. This commission had to deal with the question, what is legally allowed for us to basically take over from the streets. So, for example, the building just north of the Champlain Tower South has driveway access that is accessed through 88th Street. So we are going to dedicate as much of that street as we legally can, are able to, close that down, turn that into a park, and build some sort of memorial based on the input that a lot of the family members in the community and, all the stakeholders have put forward so far over the last year.
So you don't envision any of the current land where the Champlain Towers was, none of that land will be included in part of any sort of memorial or park or remembrance?
No, so the land itself is private property. I did attempt to get some square footage from the developer in return for having a conversation about allowing buildable area to the south. One of the first things I met with them was to try to get, they have a 20-foot setback from the property line, to try to get some of, the feet in, 10 foot, for example, into that setback where they can't build anyways, to incorporate into our memorial. So people come to the site can feel like they have their foot on, on the site of where it happened. Many of the family members that we were in contact with who were on the committees were adamant that they wanted to be on the property, in the middle of the property, or not at all. So seeing there wasn't a lot of, requirements or a lot of needs from the family members for that 10 feet, I really didn't want to subject ourselves in the town and the commission to start allowing for variance, which is something we don't do. So we have since, ceased that conversation. But we plan for our memorial, which we're going to build there, to kind of utilize with the developers, whatever they build, to incorporate some of their landscaping design, so it looks like a nice larger park than what it is.
But again, I want to be clear. So the developer says they will not provide any of the land that they now own from where the Champlain Towers was. The developer will not provide any of that land, no matter what small a percentage, to the city's efforts to try to build some sort of memorial there. Is that correct?
Well, the city's efforts have never relied on the land, with the developers. We have always understood that this is private property, so we didn't build around incorporating the private property. It was a conversation that we had to try to maybe expand what we've already dedicated. But the dedication from the town of Surfside has always been 88th Street, which belongs to the city.
Well, let me just, I know that you went and met with the developer in Dubai back in October. Tell me about that meeting. What was your impression of I'm going to mispronounce his name, Sejwani, the developer in the case?
So I met with him. His family was there. He seemed to be more of a family-oriented person. I saw some of the developments and the care that they put into their construction, but there were two elements to that meeting. Number one was to see, I guess, what the town of Surfside is in for. And the other was to try to solidify that conversation that I had previously with some of their representatives in the family, which was an earlier conversation about attaining 10 feet of that setback for the memorial. They were agreeable to such a conversation. However, again, the family members were adamant about obtaining space within the site, center to the site, which the developers cannot provide without losing their property.
I know this is difficult when you're dealing with so many family members. Are you communicating regularly with family members? And I know there's a committee of leaders within the group. Are you talking to them on a regular basis?
So the committee has been activated and was brought in as needed. We are trying to, extend on that. We got their input. We sat down and met when it came to the memorial, the permanent memorial, as far as what they, mood boards, what they wanted to see, feel, hear, to try to build some sort of RFP for design to go out.
But when was the last time you personally spoke to those committee members?
The committee members itself was last week. Some of the committee members that came in last week, we spoke with them. I just got off the phone just now, 5 minutes ago, with one of the family members. This is an ongoing conversation. We have 7 family members on the committee, of which 2 have actually been active. So the committee doesn't actually represent all the families. There's so many different feelings and aspects and different opinions that, I don't think one committee could represent them all. But not everybody is willing to come out publicly and have these conversations. It's difficult for them. So we definitely have a lot of private conversations with them.
Obviously, I've spoken to a number of the families. I've spoken to Martin Langesfeld. I've spoken to Raquel Olivieri. I've spoken to Ronit Nebraev. They all come at this from their own perspectives. But the one thing all 3 of them said, and they're all members of the committee, is that they've had no real interaction with you for a very long time. They describe it as sort of being radio silent, that you've cut off conversations with them. Give me your perspective. They clearly feel as if they're not communicating with you or not getting any information from you. Like, for instance, they didn't even know about the trip to Dubai, they say, until the Miami Herald reported on it.
So, I mean, to go back to the trip to Dubai, that is a completely false narrative. I had had many conversations specifically with Mr. Langesfeld about going to Dubai. As a matter of fact, as soon as I returned, we had a long conversation in the parking lot in town hall about Dubai in general, because him and his wife had just come back from a trip. So I understand there's a lot of frustrations and angers, from the family members who are looking for the villain of the story. And sometimes if you can't provide what it is they're looking for, you just fall into that place, especially as an elected official. So the idea that that conversation didn't come up is a complete falsehood. It was mentioned many times that I plan on having that conversation with the developers, which I did, and I delivered on my promise to have that conversation. But the anger that is there because I can't put something on the site, which is not up to me, has been directed in that sense. As far as the committee going silent, we have the committee as far as certain instances within the process of the memorial. So we built up their input, and now we're going out to an RFP for design. On my end, could I be a little more transparent and keep communication up? Absolutely, and that's something we're working on. We're just recently invited them to the pre-construction design meeting that is going to have, who's ever going to be bidding may come out to have within the town. So let them be a part of the conversation and hear out. We can definitely work on it. I mean, unfortunately, or fortunately, I have an entire town to deal with. There's many issues, flooding, ongoing issues that we as a town of Surfside have. Although it has been a top priority for us and something we addressed, within 2 weeks into office, there are other issues and items to address. And as I mentioned to some of the family members, that every day for me is another fire to put out. So unfortunately, you jump from one item to the next item, and sometimes things get put on the back burner as far as communication. But what they need to understand is that the town has been ongoing with this process. The memorial is very important to us. We've been putting together this RFP based on their feedback. It takes time. To have a weekly meeting on something that is ongoing is pointless. It wastes my time and theirs, but I understand that they want to feel more part of that conversation. And that's something that we're working on. We've currently just reassigned a liaison so the communication can get a lot better and quicker. And we're going to try to keep them more involved in that process as the RFP goes out and continues to develop.
The city is not completely without some power here. I mean, they have to come to you for permits, for regulations. I would imagine that if the city wanted to, you could play a role in trying to convince the developer to try to find some middle ground where you might be able to work out something that would be satisfactory to family members that would, while not being at the center of the land, which would alter their development, but may take more of that northeast corner or something along there, which could be then part of a larger memorial that you would plan.
So, Jim, I did have that conversation, right? That was our first conversation with the families. That was one of my first pushes to try to get some of that setback, to try to get some of that land that the developers were willing to have the communication with. You can watch some of that public meeting that happened between the family members and the developer representatives, which quickly devolved into, slamming of the posters of the 98 lives that were lost, saying, you're building on our family's graves and we need to have this for our memorial and you have no right to build. So unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be a middle ground there. I did try to facilitate that, and instead I got painted as some sort of corrupt politician. And that was the return that I got for trying to go out on a limb. Moving forward, the developers will build what they're legally allowed to build. The town will build their memorial on the street that was allocated for that. And I'm not looking to get back into a hot pot of stew with them again.
We'll be right back. Thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.